The morning sun painted golden streaks across the ancient stone walls of Windsor Castle as Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood before her bedroom mirror. Her hands trembled slightly as she fastened the pearl earrings that had belonged to Princess Diana. Today would be different from any other royal engagement she had ever attended. Today she would say goodbye to someone who had become more than just a mentor, someone who had become like a second mother to her, Lady Margaret Thornbury. The 89-year-old former lady-in-waiting to Queen Elizabeth II was retiring after 67 years of dedicated service to the royal family. Margaret had been there when William took his first steps, when he graduated from university, and when he married Catherine in that magical ceremony at Westminster Abbey. She had guided Catherine through the maze of royal protocols, teaching her everything from the proper way to curtsy to foreign dignitaries to how to handle the relentless attention of the world's media. Catherine remembered her first day as a working royal. She had been terrified, knowing that millions of people would be watching her every move, analyzing every word she spoke, every dress she wore, even the way she smiled. Margaret had appeared at her side like a guardian angel, her silver hair perfectly styled, her warm brown eyes twinkling with wisdom and kindness. "Your Royal Highness," Margaret had said in her gentle Scottish accent, "being royal is not about being perfect. It's about being real, being kind, and remembering that behind every face in the crowd is a person with their own hopes and fears." Those words had changed everything for Catherine. Instead of trying to be someone she wasn't, she learned to be herself while honoring the traditions and responsibilities that came with her position. Margaret had shown her that royalty was about service, about using privilege to make a difference in people's lives. As Catherine walked through the castle corridors toward the morning room where she would meet William, she thought about all the moments Margaret had shared with them. The elderly woman had been present for every major milestone: the births of George, Charlotte and Louis, their first Christmas as a married couple, the challenging times when media criticism felt overwhelming. Margaret had a special gift for knowing exactly what to say and when to say it. During Catherine's difficult early pregnancy with George, when morning sickness kept her confined to bed for weeks, Margaret had sat beside her every day, reading stories and sharing tales of royal life that made Catherine laugh despite feeling terrible. "You know, dear," Margaret had said one particularly difficult morning, "Queen Victoria was dreadfully sick during her pregnancies too. She once told her doctor that if men had to bear children, families would never have more than one child." Catherine had laughed so hard that day. It was the first time she had smiled in weeks. William found his wife in the morning room, staring out at the gardens where Margaret often took evening walks. He could see the sadness in Catherine's eyes, and it made his own heart heavy. Margaret had been a constant in his life since childhood, one of the few people who remembered his mother and could share stories about Diana that no one else knew. "She told me once," William said softly, approaching Catherine and placing his hands gently on her shoulders, "that my mother used to sneak into the kitchen late at night to make herself toast and jam. Said she was the only royal she ever knew who actually knew how to use a toaster." Catherine smiled through the tears that had started to form. This was exactly the kind of story Margaret loved to tell, small human moments that showed the person behind the title. Margaret had hundreds of these stories, and Catherine realized with a sharp pang that soon, these precious memories would no longer have their original keeper. "I don't know how to say goodbye to her, William," Catherine whispered. "She's been like a mother to me these past 13 years. She taught me everything about being part of this family. How do you thank someone for that?" William pulled his wife closer, understanding her pain completely. Margaret had filled a void left by his mother's death, providing the maternal guidance and wisdom that he and Harry had needed as they navigated their royal duties. For Catherine, who had married into the family as an outsider, Margaret had been even more crucial, a bridge between her old life and her new one, helping her find her place in the ancient institution of the monarchy. The retirement ceremony was planned for the afternoon in the castle's grand ballroom. There would be speeches, presentations, and formal recognition of Margaret's decades of service. But Catherine knew that no official ceremony could capture the true impact this remarkable woman had made on their lives. As the couple stood together in the quiet morning room, both lost in their own memories of Margaret, they heard the familiar sound of her footsteps in the corridor outside. Even at 89, Margaret moved with the grace and purpose that had defined her entire career. She knocked gently on the door, and Catherine quickly wiped away her tears. "Come in, Margaret," William called, and the door opened to reveal the woman who had been the backbone of their family for so many years. She was dressed in her finest navy blue dress, her silver hair styled perfectly, but there was something different about her expression, a mixture of pride and sadness that reflected exactly what William and Catherine were feeling. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Margaret said, though they all knew she would never truly be interrupting anything in their lives. "I wanted to speak with you both before the ceremony begins." Margaret stepped into the morning room with the same quiet dignity she had carried throughout her 67 years of royal service. The afternoon light streaming through the tall windows seemed to create a halo around her silver hair, and Catherine couldn't help but think how fitting that was. To them, Margaret had always been something of an angel. "Your Royal Highnesses," Margaret began, then caught herself with a gentle smile. "William and Catherine," she corrected, using their names as she had been invited to do in private moments over the years. "I have something I need to tell you both, and I'm afraid if I wait until after the ceremony, I might lose my courage." William and Catherine exchanged glances, both sensing the weight of whatever Margaret was about to share. They had known this day was coming for months, but somehow they had all avoided talking about the reality of what it would mean. Margaret moved to the window, looking out at the gardens she had walked through thousands of times over the decades. "When I started working for your grandmother, William, I was just 22 years old. I thought I knew everything about life, about service, about what it meant to be part of something bigger than yourself." She paused, her voice growing softer. "I had no idea how much this family would teach me, how much you would all give back to me." Catherine felt her throat tighten. She had always admired Margaret's strength, the way she seemed to handle every situation with perfect composure. But now she could see the emotion the older woman was trying to keep in check. "I've served 4 generations of your family," Margaret continued, turning back to face them. "I've seen births and deaths, weddings and divorces, triumphs and heartbreaks. But nothing in all those years prepared me for the joy of watching you two find each other and build the family you have." William reached for Catherine's hand, squeezing it gently. They both remembered how Margaret had been one of the first people to recognize that their university romance was something special. While the media and even some family members had doubts about whether Catherine would fit into royal life, Margaret had never wavered in her support. "Do you remember?" Margaret asked, looking directly at Catherine. "The night before your wedding? You were so nervous you couldn't eat dinner, and I found you in the library at midnight, reading about royal protocols." Catherine laughed through the tears that were now flowing freely. "You sat with me until 3 in the morning, going through every possible scenario that might happen during the ceremony. You even practiced walking in my dress shoes so you could show me how to manage the train." "What I remember most about that night," Margaret said, her own eyes becoming misty, "was when you asked me if I thought Diana would have approved of you marrying William. Do you remember what I told you?" William's breath caught in his throat. He had never heard this story before, and suddenly he needed to know what had been said about his mother on that sacred night before his wedding. Catherine nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When she finally found her voice, it was barely above a whisper. "You told me that Diana had once said she hoped William would marry someone who would love him for who he was, not what he was. Someone who would make him laugh, who would support him through the difficult times, and who would help him be the king he was meant to be." Margaret moved closer to the young couple, reaching out to take both of their hands in hers. Her skin was soft and warm, marked by age but still strong. "I told you that night that Diana would have loved you immediately, Catherine. Not because you were perfect, but because you were perfect for William. And I was right, wasn't I?" William cleared his throat, struggling to maintain his composure. "Margaret, you've done so much more than serve our family. You've been our anchor, our guide, our conscience sometimes when we needed it most. How can we possibly let you go?" The elderly woman smiled, the same radiant smile that had comforted them through countless difficult moments. "Oh, my dear boy, you're not letting me go. I'm not disappearing from the earth. I'm just stepping back from the daily duties so I can spend more time with my own grandchildren, and maybe finally learn how to use that computer my daughter bought me." They all laughed, but the laughter was tinged with sadness. They knew that while Margaret would always be part of their lives, it would never be the same. No more daily conversations about schedules and protocols. No more quiet moments of advice before important events. No more having their greatest supporter and most trusted confidant just a few rooms away. Catherine thought about all the times Margaret had gone above and beyond her official duties. Like the time 3-year-old George had a nightmare during a royal tour and wouldn't stop crying for his parents. Margaret had stayed up all night with the little prince, telling him stories about his father's childhood adventures until he fell asleep peacefully in her arms, or when Charlotte had been struggling with her first day of school anxiety, and Margaret had secretly arranged for the little princess's favorite stuffed animal to appear in her school bag, with a note saying it was there to keep her brave all day. And just last year, when Louis had broken his arm and was terrified of going to the hospital, Margaret had transformed the scary experience into an adventure, telling him he was as brave as the knights who used to live in the castle, and that his cast would be like armor protecting him while he healed. These weren't duties in any job description. They were acts of love from a woman who had made their children her own grandchildren in every way that mattered. "Margaret," Catherine said suddenly, "I need you to promise me something." The older woman raised her eyebrows, waiting. "Promise me that you'll still come to family dinners. Promise me that you'll still be there for the children's birthdays and Christmas morning. Promise me that when they're older and facing their own challenges, they'll still be able to turn to you for the wisdom and love you've given William and me." Margaret's composure finally broke, and tears began streaming down her cheeks. "My dear Catherine, nothing could keep me away from this family. You've all been my greatest joy, my proudest accomplishment. Watching you become the mother and princess you are today has been one of the greatest privileges of my life." The three of them stood together in the morning room, holding hands and crying, knowing that something precious was ending even as they tried to celebrate all the beautiful memories they had created together. The grand ballroom at Windsor Castle had been transformed for Margaret's retirement ceremony. Hundreds of people filled the ornate space, members of the royal family, government officials, fellow staff members, and representatives from the countless charities Margaret had supported over the decades. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the gathering, and the ancient walls seemed to echo with the weight of history being made. Catherine stood at William's side near the front of the room, wearing an elegant navy dress that she had chosen specifically because Margaret had once mentioned it was her favorite color. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her, and despite the grandeur of the occasion, her thoughts kept drifting to the private conversation they had shared that morning. The ceremony began with speeches from various dignitaries, each person taking their turn to praise Margaret's decades of loyal service. The Archbishop of Canterbury spoke about her moral guidance and unwavering faith. The Prime Minister highlighted her role in modernizing royal protocols while maintaining traditions. Fellow staff members shared stories of her kindness and mentorship. But as beautiful as these tributes were, Catherine could see that Margaret was growing tired. At 89, standing for extended periods was difficult, and the emotional weight of the day was clearly taking its toll. The older woman's usual perfect posture was slightly bent, and she was gripping the back of her chair for support. William noticed too, and he leaned over to whisper something to an aide. Within moments, a comfortable armchair was discreetly brought forward, and Margaret was invited to sit. The gesture was small, but it demonstrated the care and respect that had always characterized the relationship between the royal family and their most trusted staff member. When it came time for William and Catherine to speak, they had originally planned separate remarks, but standing there, looking at Margaret surrounded by everyone whose lives she had touched, Catherine made a spontaneous decision. She reached for William's hand and squeezed it 3 times, their private signal that meant "I love you," then stepped forward to the microphone. "Lady Margaret," Catherine began, her voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's excellent acoustics, "everyone here today has spoken about your professional accomplishments, your dedication to duty, your years of service. These things are all true and worthy of celebration. But I want to talk about something else. I want to talk about your heart." The room fell completely silent. This wasn't the formal, protocol-driven speech everyone had expected. This was something much more personal, much more real. 13 years ago I was terrified, Catherine continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. I was a young woman from a middle-class family who was about to marry the future King of England. I didn't know how to be a princess. I didn't know how to balance being myself with being what everyone expected me to be. And then I met you. Margaret's eyes were fixed on Catherine, tears already beginning to form. Around the ballroom, people were leaning forward, drawn in by the raw honesty of what they were hearing. "You didn't teach me how to be perfect," Catherine said. "You taught me how to be kind. You didn't teach me how to be someone else. You taught me how to be the best version of myself. When I made mistakes, and I made many, you never made me feel ashamed. Instead, you helped me learn and grow from them." William watched his wife with profound admiration. He had seen Catherine give hundreds of speeches over the years, but never had he heard her speak with such emotional depth and vulnerability. She was opening her heart to the room, sharing feelings that she normally kept private. "You've been there for every important moment in our lives," Catherine continued. "When our children were born, you were among the first people to hold them. When they took their first steps, said their first words, started school, you were there, celebrating with us, supporting us, loving them as if they were your own grandchildren." The crowd was completely captivated. Many people were wiping away tears, moved by Catherine's words and by the obvious deep affection between the princess and the retiring lady-in-waiting. "But what I will remember most," Catherine said, her voice beginning to crack with emotion, "is not the big moments. It's the small ones. The cup of tea you brought me when I was struggling with morning sickness, the way you always remembered my mother's birthday and sent her flowers, how you stayed up all night with George when he had the flu during our tour of Australia, the stories you told Charlotte about strong princesses from history when she was feeling scared about starting school." Margaret was openly crying now, but her tears were mixed with the most beautiful smile Catherine had ever seen. Around the ballroom, there wasn't a dry eye to be found. Even the usually stoic palace guards standing at attention along the walls were clearly moved by what they were witnessing. "You've taught our children that being royal isn't about titles or crowns or palaces," Catherine continued. "It's about service, about kindness, about using whatever privileges we have to make the world a little better for others. They will carry those lessons with them for the rest of their lives, and someday, they'll teach them to their own children." William stepped forward then, placing his hand gently on Catherine's shoulder. She looked at him and nodded, knowing that he wanted to add something to what she had said. "Margaret," William said, his voice deep and full of emotion, "my mother died when I was 15 years old. For most of my adult life, I thought I would have to navigate being a husband, a father, and someday a king without having that maternal wisdom to guide me. But you filled that role, didn't you? You gave me back something I thought I had lost forever." The silence in the ballroom was profound. Everyone present understood that they were witnessing something extraordinarily rare. Members of the royal family speaking not as formal figures, but as human beings expressing genuine love and gratitude. "So today," William continued, "we're not just celebrating your retirement. We're celebrating a life of love, a career defined not by duty alone but by genuine care for others. We're celebrating a woman who made our family stronger, our children happier, and our lives richer in every possible way." William and Catherine moved toward Margaret then, and the entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath, sensing that something special was about to happen. As William and Catherine approached Margaret, the elderly woman struggled to stand from her chair. Her legs, weakened by age and the emotional weight of the day, trembled slightly beneath her. Without hesitation, both William and Catherine reached out to steady her, their hands gentle but firm as they helped her rise. The moment Margaret was standing, something unexpected happened. Instead of the formal handshake or polite kiss on the cheek that protocol would normally dictate, Catherine simply opened her arms. It was an invitation, a gesture of pure love that transcended all the rules and traditions that usually governed royal interactions. Margaret didn't hesitate for even a second. She stepped forward into Catherine's embrace, and suddenly they were holding each other like a mother and daughter who hadn't seen each other in years. Catherine's arms wrapped around the older woman's frail shoulders, while Margaret's hands pressed against Catherine's back, pulling her close. The ballroom, filled with hundreds of people, fell into complete silence. Camera flashes stopped. Conversations ceased. Even the staff members standing along the walls seemed to freeze in place. Everyone present understood that they were witnessing something profound, something that went far beyond the formal ceremony they had expected. William watched his wife and the woman who had been like a second mother to him, and felt his own composure finally break. Tears streamed down his face as he saw the pure love between these two women, who had been so important to his life. Unable to stand apart from this moment any longer, He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around both of them. Now it was a three-way embrace. Three people who had shared so many joys and sorrows, so many quiet moments and grand occasions, holding each other as if they could somehow stop time and keep this perfect moment forever. Margaret's voice, muffled against Catherine's shoulder, was barely audible even in the profound silence of the ballroom. "My dear children," she whispered, "my dear precious children, you have given me the most beautiful life." Catherine's shoulders shook with the force of her emotions. She had cried in public before, at memorial services, at particularly moving charity events, but never like this. These weren't the controlled tears of someone trying to maintain composure while showing appropriate emotion. These were the unguarded tears of a woman saying goodbye to someone she loved deeply. "We love you so much, Margaret," Catherine whispered back. "We love you so very much." The embrace lasted much longer than anyone had expected. In normal circumstances, royal protocol would have demanded that such a display be brief and controlled. But this wasn't about protocol. This wasn't about maintaining proper royal behavior. This was about love, pure and simple, and everyone in the room understood that some moments are too precious to be rushed. People in the ballroom began to cry themselves, moved not just by what they were seeing, but by what it represented. In a world where the royal family was often seen as distant and formal, this moment revealed the deep human connections that existed beneath the titles and traditions. It showed that behind the crown and the ceremonies, these were people who loved each other genuinely and completely. Margaret's granddaughter, sitting in the third row, covered her mouth with her hands as tears streamed down her cheeks. She had known that her grandmother was beloved by the royal family, but seeing this display of pure affection made her realize just how profound that love really was. The Archbishop of Canterbury, who had officiated at William and Catherine's wedding and had baptized all three of their children, found himself deeply moved by what he was witnessing. In all his years of royal service, he had rarely seen such an authentic display of emotion and love. When the three finally separated, all of them were crying openly. Margaret's makeup had smudged slightly, and Catherine's carefully styled hair was a bit disheveled from the embrace, but neither of them cared. They were both radiant with the kind of joy that comes from expressing love without reservation. William, still emotional himself, placed one hand on Margaret's shoulder and one on Catherine's. "Thank you," he said simply, looking directly into Margaret's eyes. "Thank you for everything." Margaret reached up with her trembling hands and gently touched both of their faces, the way a grandmother might touch her beloved grandchildren. "No, my dears," she said, her voice stronger now despite her tears. "Thank you. Thank you for letting me be part of your family. Thank you for trusting me with your children. Thank you for giving me a purpose and a joy that went far beyond anything I ever imagined when I first started working here." The room remained silent, everyone still processing what they had just witnessed. This wasn't just a retirement ceremony anymore. It had become something much more significant, a celebration of love, family, and the bonds that connect people across generations and social boundaries. Catherine took Margaret's hands in hers, and for a moment they just looked at each other. 13 years of shared experiences passed between them in that gaze. The nervous young woman who had first entered the royal family, and the wise mentor who had guided her every step of the way. "You will always be part of our family." "Margaret," Catherine said, her voice clear and strong despite her tears. "Always. The children will grow up knowing that they have a grandmother in you, and William and I will never make an important decision without asking ourselves what you would think, what advice you would give." Margaret smiled through her tears, and for a moment she looked decades younger. The joy in her face was radiant, transforming her from a frail elderly woman into someone vibrant and full of life. "And I will always be here for you," Margaret replied. "All of you. Whenever you need me, whenever you want to talk, whenever the children want to hear stories about their father's childhood mishaps, I will be here." They all laughed then, the tension of the intense emotion finally breaking into something lighter, but no less meaningful. William groaned good-naturedly, knowing that Margaret had an endless supply of embarrassing stories from his youth that she loved to share. As they finally stepped back from each other, the entire ballroom erupted into applause. But this wasn't the polite, measured clapping that typically accompanied royal events. This was enthusiastic, heartfelt applause from people who had been moved by something genuine and beautiful. The applause in the grand ballroom seemed to go on forever, wave after wave of appreciation washing over Margaret as she stood between William and Catherine. Her cheeks were flushed with emotion, and perhaps a touch of embarrassment at being the center of such overwhelming attention, but her smile was radiant. This was the moment she had dreamed of during the long nights when she worried about growing old and being forgotten, to know that her life's work had truly mattered. As the clapping finally began to subside, Catherine noticed that Margaret was swaying slightly on her feet. The emotional intensity of the day, combined with standing for so long, was clearly taking its toll on the elderly woman. Without drawing attention to Margaret's fatigue, Catherine gently guided her back to the comfortable chair that had been brought forward. "Please, sit with us for a moment," Catherine said softly, pulling her own chair closer so they could continue talking privately, despite being surrounded by hundreds of people. William followed suit, and suddenly the three of them were seated together like old friends having tea. The formal ceremony transformed into something intimate and personal. The crowd in the ballroom seemed to understand instinctively that this was a precious moment, and their conversations dropped to respectful whispers. Margaret reached into her small purse and withdrew a handkerchief that was clearly well used and much loved. As she dabbed at her eyes, Catherine noticed the delicate embroidery along the edges, tiny forget-me-nots stitched in pale blue thread. "My grandmother made this for me when I started my first job at the palace," Margaret explained. Noticing Catherine's attention, she told me that no matter how fancy my surroundings became, I should never forget where I came from or who I really was. William leaned forward with interest. "What was your first day like? You were so young when you started." Margaret's eyes took on a distant look as she traveled back in time. "I was absolutely terrified. I came from a small Scottish village where everyone knew everyone else, and suddenly I was in this enormous castle, surrounded by people who seemed to know secrets I couldn't even imagine." "Your great-grandmother was still alive then, William, and she was quite formidable. But you stayed," Catherine observed. "What made you decide that this was where you belonged?" A soft smile crossed Margaret's features. "It was actually your grandfather, William. He was just a little boy then, maybe 6 or 7 years old. I was trying to find my way to the kitchen for my first day of training, and I got completely lost in these corridors. I was wandering around, probably looking very confused, when this little prince appeared." William raised his eyebrows. "My grandfather helped you. He took one look at me and said, 'You look lost. Are you the new lady who's going to help take care of us?' And when I nodded, he grabbed my hand and said, 'Don't worry. Everyone gets lost here at first. I'll show you the way.' And he did. He walked me all the way to the kitchen, chattering the entire time about his favorite biscuits and asking if I knew how to play cricket." Catherine felt her heart swell with emotion. This was exactly the kind of story that revealed the humanity behind the royal titles, the kindness that ran through generations of William's family. "That's when I knew," Margaret continued, "that this wasn't just about serving an institution. It was about caring for people, for children who needed love and guidance just like any other children, despite all their privileges and responsibilities." The conversation was interrupted by a gentle commotion near the ballroom entrance. George, Charlotte, and Louis appeared, still wearing their school uniforms, their faces bright with excitement at being included in such an important grown-up event. They had been at school during the formal ceremony, but Catherine had arranged for them to arrive in time for the reception afterward. Margaret's entire demeanor changed when she saw the children. The fatigue seemed to melt away from her features, replaced by pure joy. This was what she had been most looking forward to, seeing her beloved little ones one more time in her official capacity. "Gangan Margaret," Louis called out, using the special name he had created for her when he first started talking. He broke free from his nanny's hand and ran toward the small group, his school blazer flying behind him. Margaret opened her arms just in time to catch the 5-year-old as he launched himself into her lap. Charlotte and George followed more sedately, but their faces were just as bright with happiness at seeing their beloved family friend. "We brought you something," Charlotte announced, producing a carefully wrapped package from behind her back. "We made it ourselves at school." Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she unwrapped the gift, revealing a handmade photo album. The cover was decorated with glitter, stickers, and somewhat crooked letters that spelled out "Our Gangan Margaret." Inside, the pages were filled with pictures the children had drawn, photos from family holidays and special occasions, and short messages written in their careful handwriting. "This page is from me," George said proudly, pointing to a drawing of a castle with several stick figures standing in front of it. "That's you and Mummy and Papa and me and Charlotte and Louie all together. And this is from me," Charlotte added, flipping to a page covered in pink and purple flowers. "I drew all your favorite flowers because you taught me their names in the garden." Louis, still perched on Margaret's lap, pointed to his contribution, a page covered in colorful handprints. "I put my hands in paint and made these for you so you can remember how big my hands are right now." Margaret clutched the album to her chest, completely overcome with emotion. "This is the most beautiful gift I have ever received," she said, her voice thick with tears. "I will treasure it always." Catherine watched this interaction with her children and felt a fresh wave of sadness about Margaret's departure. The older woman had been such a constant presence in their lives that the children couldn't imagine family events without her. How do you explain to young children that someone they love won't be around every day anymore, even though nothing bad has happened? "Gone, Margaret," Louis said, his small hand patting her cheek. "Mummy said you're not going to live at the castle anymore. But you'll still come for my birthday, right?" Margaret's composure nearly broke completely at the innocent question. "Oh, my sweet boy," she said, hugging him tightly. "I will never miss your birthday, or Charlotte's birthday, or George's birthday, or Christmas, or any special day that's important to you. Promise?" Charlotte asked, moving closer to lean against Margaret's chair. "I promise," Margaret said solemnly. "Cross my heart." George, who at 10 was old enough to understand more about what was happening, looked serious for a moment. "Will you miss us, Margaret?" "Every single day," she replied honestly. "But missing someone you love isn't sad when you know you'll see them again soon. And besides, every time I look at this beautiful book you made me, I'll remember how much you love me, and that will make me happy." As the afternoon wore on, the formal retirement ceremony gradually transformed into something that felt more like a family gathering. Palace staff members who had worked alongside Margaret for decades came forward to share memories and express their gratitude. Longtime friends from Margaret's village in Scotland had traveled down for the occasion, their faces glowing with pride as they watched their dear friend receive such heartfelt recognition. Catherine noticed how Margaret seemed to have a special memory or connection with each person who approached her. The head gardener reminded her of the time she had helped him plant a memorial rose garden for Princess Diana. The head cook laughed about Margaret's attempts to learn traditional Scottish recipes so she could make William feel more connected to that part of his heritage. Even the youngest staff members had stories about how Margaret had mentored them, helped them navigate palace protocols, or simply been kind to them during difficult times. "She's touched so many lives," Catherine whispered to William, as they watched Margaret chat with a group of housekeeping staff who were clearly fighting back tears at the thought of her departure. William nodded, his own eyes still red from the emotional events of the day. "I think I'm finally understanding the full scope of what we're losing. It's not just that we're losing Our Lady-in-Waiting, we're losing the heart of this place." As the reception continued, Catherine found herself studying Margaret's face, trying to memorize every detail, the laugh lines around her eyes that had deepened over years of finding joy in her work, the way her silver hair caught the light from the chandeliers, the gentle but confident way she held herself, even at 89 years old. The pearl brooch on her dress that had been a gift from Queen Elizabeth II decades earlier. Catherine realized that she wanted to remember everything about this day, not just the dramatic moments of their emotional farewell, but the smaller details too, the way Margaret's hands moved gracefully as she spoke, even though arthritis had made them stiff and painful, how she still insisted on standing whenever William or Catherine entered a room, despite their repeated requests for her to remain seated. The soft Scottish accent that became more pronounced when she was emotional or tired. As evening approached, the crowd in the ballroom began to thin. Many of the official guests had other obligations, and the children were growing restless despite their excitement about the special day. Catherine could see that Margaret was exhausted, though she was doing her best to hide it behind her usual gracious smile. "Perhaps we should let Margaret rest," William suggested quietly. It's been a very long day for her. But before they could suggest ending the reception, Margaret herself stood up slowly, using her walking stick for support. The conversations around the ballroom quieted as people noticed her movement, sensing that she might have something more to say. "My dear friends," Margaret began, her voice carrying despite its weariness, I cannot let this day end without saying one more thing. For 67 years, I have had the extraordinary privilege of serving this family and this institution. But the greatest privilege has been watching love grow and flourish in these ancient walls. She looked directly at William and Catherine, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I have watched William grow from a sad little boy who missed his mother into a man who honors her memory every day through his kindness and dedication. I have watched Catherine transform from a nervous young woman into a princess who embodies everything that is best about the modern monarchy. The remaining guests hung on every word, understanding that they were hearing something very special. But most importantly, Margaret continued, I have watched these two people create a family built on love, laughter, and genuine care for others. Their children are growing up understanding that their privileges come with responsibilities, that kindness matters more than protocol, and that being royal means serving others, not being served by them. She paused, gripping her walking stick more tightly as emotion threatened to overwhelm her again. When I started working here as a young woman, I thought my job was to help maintain traditions. What I learned over the years is that the most important tradition we can maintain is love. Love for family, love for duty, love for the people we serve. Catherine felt fresh tears spring to her eyes. Even now, even on her last day, Margaret was thinking about others, about the legacy she was leaving behind, about the future of the family she had served so faithfully. So as I step back from daily duties, Margaret concluded, I do so with complete confidence that the future of this family is in the most capable, loving hands imaginable. William and Catherine, you have made me proud every single day. Your children will grow up to be remarkable people because they have remarkable parents. The applause that followed was different from earlier in the day. This time it was quieter, more thoughtful, filled with the weight of recognition that something important was ending but something else was continuing. As people began to leave, expressing final words of gratitude and affection to Margaret, Catherine found herself alone with the older woman for a few precious minutes. William had stepped away to thank some of the dignitaries who were departing, and the children were with their nanny, looking at the gifts Margaret had received. Margaret, Catherine said softly, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Margaret raised her eyebrows, curious about what Catherine might want to know. Are you really ready for this? Are you really ready to step back from everything that has been your life for so long? Margaret was quiet for a long moment, considering the question carefully. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful and honest. Catherine, my dear, I would be lying if I said I wasn't frightened. This work, this family, has been my entire adult life. I don't know what it will feel like to wake up in the morning without having duties to perform, without having you and William and the children needing me. Catherine's heart ached at the vulnerability in Margaret's voice. Then why now? Why not wait another year or two? Margaret smiled, but there was sadness in it too. Because I love this family too much to stay beyond my time. I've seen what happens when people hold on too long, when they become burdens instead of helpers. I want to leave while I can still be remembered for the good I've done, not for the mistakes I might make if I stayed too long. The wisdom in Margaret's words was profound, but Catherine still felt a selfish desire to ask her to reconsider, to find a way to keep her close even if her official duties were reduced. Besides, Margaret added, her tone becoming lighter, I have some living of my own to do. I want to spend time with my own grandchildren, to travel to places I've never seen, to read books that have nothing to do with royal protocols. I want to discover who Margaret Thornberry is when she's not Lady Margaret, lady-in-waiting to the royal family. Catherine nodded, understanding, but still sad. Will you write to me? Will you tell me about your adventures? Every week, Margaret promised. And you must write to me too. I want to hear about everything. The children's school plays, William's new projects, your own work with the charities. I want to know that even though I'm not here every day, I'm still part of your lives. They sat together in comfortable silence for a moment, both of them absorbing the magnitude of the change that was about to occur in their lives. Margaret, Catherine said finally, I hope you know that you've been more than an employee, more than a friend. You've been family. You've been the mother I needed when I joined this family, the grandmother my children adore, the wise counselor William and I have turned to countless times. Nothing about that changes just because your job title is changing. Margaret reached over and squeezed Catherine's hand. And I hope you know that you and William and those precious children have given my life meaning beyond anything I ever imagined. I may be retiring from my position, but I will never retire from loving you all." The final moments of Margaret's last official day arrived all too quickly. The ballroom had emptied except for family members and the closest staff, creating an intimate atmosphere that felt more appropriate for such a meaningful goodbye. The grand chandeliers had been dimmed, and the soft glow of table lamps created a warm, golden light that made everything feel dreamlike. Margaret stood in the center of the ballroom, still wearing her navy blue dress, but now with a beautiful cashmere shawl that had been a gift from Catherine draped around her shoulders. Her silver hair had come slightly loose from its careful styling, giving her a softer, more relaxed appearance. Despite the fatigue that was clearly visible in her face, her eyes remained bright and alert, taking in every detail of these precious final moments. William approached her first, carrying a large, elegantly wrapped package. "Margaret, we have one more gift for you, something we've been working on for months." Margaret's eyes widened with curiosity as she carefully unwrapped the package, her arthritic fingers working slowly but determinedly with the ribbon and paper. When she finally revealed the contents, she gasped audibly and pressed her hands to her heart. It was a leather-bound photo album, but not the simple collection of pictures she might have expected. This was a professional compilation of her entire career with the royal family, starting with a formal portrait from her very first day in 1958. Page after page revealed the story of her life in service, photos from royal tours, state dinners, family holidays, and countless informal moments that someone had carefully documented over the decades. "How did you get all of these?" Margaret whispered, turning each page with reverence. There were pictures of her helping a young Prince Charles with his homework, standing beside Queen Elizabeth II during a garden party in the 1970s, teaching a teenage William how to tie a formal bow tie, holding a newborn Charlotte for the first time. "We've been collecting them for months," Catherine explained. "Every photographer who has ever worked with the family, every staff member who had personal photos, every archive in the palace. We wanted you to have a record of just how much you've been part of our family's story." Margaret's hands trembled as she continued turning pages. Near the end of the album, she found the most recent photos, images from just weeks ago of her reading to Louis, helping Charlotte with a school project, and walking through the palace gardens with George. The final page contained a photo taken that very morning, showing all three children presenting her with their handmade gift. "This is incredible," Margaret said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I had no idea so many moments had been captured. It's like seeing my entire life laid out before me." William knelt beside her chair so he could look at the album with her. "We wanted you to remember not just the big occasions, but all the everyday moments too. The real moments that made you part of our family." As Margaret continued to examine the album, Catherine noticed that several other family members had quietly entered the ballroom. Princess Anne had arrived along with the Earl and Countess of Wessex. Even some of the cousins who lived further away had made the effort to be present for Margaret's farewell. This wasn't planned. It was simply a spontaneous gathering of people who all loved and respected the woman who had been a constant in their lives for so many years. One by one, they each approached Margaret to offer their personal thanks and farewells. Each conversation was brief but meaningful, filled with shared memories and expressions of gratitude. Margaret seemed to grow stronger with each interaction, as if the love and appreciation of the family was giving her energy. But as the evening progressed, it became clear that the most difficult goodbye was yet to come. William, Catherine, and the children were the last to remain, and suddenly the enormity of what was happening seemed to hit everyone at once. George, who had been trying to be brave all day, suddenly burst into tears. "I don't want Gangan Margaret to leave," he sobbed, throwing himself into her arms. "Why can't she just stay forever?" Margaret held the 10-year-old close, her own tears starting to flow again. "Oh, my precious boy," she murmured into his hair. "Growing up means learning that sometimes people we love have to make changes, even when we don't want them to. But love doesn't change, does it? I will love you just as much from my new home as I do right here in the castle." Charlotte and Louis joined the embrace, and suddenly Margaret was surrounded by all three children, all of them crying and holding on tightly. Catherine had to turn away for a moment, overwhelmed by the scene before her. When the children finally released Margaret, they each made her promise specific things. George made her promise to come to his rugby matches, Charlotte made her promise to help her learn about flowers for her school garden project. Louis made her promise to bring him chocolate biscuits when she visited, because he had noticed that she always had the best ones in her pocket. Margaret promised everything, sealing each vow with a kiss on their foreheads and a whispered "I love you." Finally, it was time for William and Catherine to say their own final goodbye. The three of them stood together in the center of the ballroom where this emotional day had begun, surrounded by the history and grandeur of the castle, but focused entirely on each other. "I don't know how to do this," Catherine admitted, her voice breaking. "I don't know how to say goodbye to you." Margaret reached out and took both of Catherine's hands in hers. "Then don't say goodbye. Say until we meet again. Because we will meet again, my dear. Nothing about my love for you is ending today." William stepped forward then, and without words the three of them came together in one final embrace. This time they held each other even longer than they had during the ceremony, as if they could somehow pour all their love and gratitude into this single moment. "Thank you," William whispered. "Thank you for everything. Thank you for loving us." "Thank you for letting me," Margaret whispered back. When they finally separated, all three of them were crying freely. But there was something peaceful about it now. They had expressed everything that needed to be expressed. No words had been left unsaid, no feelings left unexpressed. Margaret picked up her new photo album and her walking stick, then turned for one last look around the ballroom where she had attended countless events over the decades. 67 years, she said softly. What a magnificent adventure it has been. As she walked slowly toward the door, supported by William on one side and Catherine on the other, she paused once more. "You know," she said with a small smile, "I think this isn't really an ending at all. I think it's just the beginning of a new chapter." And with that, Lady Margaret Thornbury walked out of the ballroom for the last time, as an official member of the royal household staff. But as a permanent member of the royal family's heart, her legacy of love and service would continue forever. The ballroom fell silent behind them, but it was not the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of completion, of a story that had been told beautifully and would be remembered always. Margaret's footsteps echoed through the corridors one final time, but the love she had shared would echo through the generations that would follow.